The fee was wrong by $4.11, and Marisol Vega had been staring at it for longer than the old woman in front of her would ever know. It was a Tuesday, and the branch was busy in the particular joyless way that banks are busy. The velvet ropes, the shuffling line, the soft institutional hum of people waiting to be told no about their own money. Marisol worked the end window, the one farthest from the door, the one they gave you when management had decided, without ever saying so, that you were not the face they wanted greeting the good accounts. She had worked that window for 6 years. She had learned to love it the way you learn to love the seat at the back of the bus. Nobody bothered you there, and you could see the whole room. The old woman had come in 11 minutes before the lunch rush, moving slowly, and the branch reacted to her the way a clean room reacts to a smudge. She was small and bent, and dressed in clothes that had been good once, a decade or two ago. A wool coat gone shiny at the elbows, a headscarf, shoes that had been resoled more than once and recently. She carried a vinyl handbag pressed to her chest with both hands, the way you hold something when you've learned the world will take it if you don't. And she had made the mistake of approaching the front window first, where Tyler Brandt stood in his good suit, and Tyler had looked at her for about half a second, and then looked over her head at the next person in line as though she were a draft that had come in under the door. "Ma'am, this window's for account services," Tyler said, to a point somewhere above her headscarf. "Somebody can help you over there." Over there was Marisol's window. Of course it was. So the old woman made her slow way down the length of the counter, past the velvet rope, past the good accounts, to the window at the end, and Marisol watched her come the whole way, and had already done the thing she always did, the thing nobody had ever once thanked her for. She had stopped seeing a problem walking toward her, and started seeing a person. "Good morning," Marisol said, and meant it. "Take your time. There's no rush at all." The old woman's eyes came up, surprised, and something in them loosened. That small, awful loosening of a person braced for unkindness who has just been handed its opposite and doesn't quite trust it yet. "I have an account," the old woman said. Her voice was accented, careful, the voice of someone who chose each English word like a coin from a thin purse. "An old one. From long ago. I want only to know. Is it still there? The number is here." She unfolded a piece of paper, soft as cloth from handling, and slid it across with both hands. Behind Marisol, she heard it begin. Daniela at the next window exhaling through her nose. A muttered something from the back and a low laugh. "Here we go." Marisol's adopting another one. Because it was a known thing about her, a joke at the branch, that the fat girl at the end window would spend 20 minutes on a customer with $11. She let it go past her like weather. She had learned that the moment you flinch, you hand them the afternoon. She typed in the number. The account was there. It had been there, she saw, for 31 years. Opened before Marisol was born, dormant, a small, steady balance that had sat untouched through 3 decades and 4 changes of the bank's name. The kind of account the branch loved to forget existed, because forgotten accounts were quiet, and quiet accounts could be managed. And that was when she saw the fee. It was small. $4.11, a monthly account maintenance assessment, posted last month, and again the month before, and the month before that. A tidy little subtraction, too small to notice. The kind of number a person living on a thin fixed income would see and assume was simply the cost of having money in a bank, because banks took, that was what they were for, and who would fight over $4. Marisol noticed it because Marisol noticed everything about the small accounts. And the thing that made the back of her neck go cool was that she had seen it before. Not on this account. On others. On Mr. Aldous, who was 90 and blind in one eye. On the Petrosian sisters, who shared one account and never checked it. The kind of customer who would never read a statement closely enough to ask why a maintenance fee had appeared on an account type that, Marisol knew for a fact, did not carry a maintenance fee. She knew it did not carry one because she had opened 19 of these accounts herself and waived that exact fee 19 times because waving it was bank policy for balances under a certain threshold. Somebody had switched it back on. Quietly. On the accounts of people who would never notice. "Is it there?" the old woman asked, watching Marisol's face. "My account? Is it gone?" "It's here," Marisol said gently, and made her voice easy, because there was no reason to frighten this woman with something Marisol did not yet understand. "It's all here. 31 years. You've kept it a long time." "My husband opened it," the old woman said. "For an emergency." He said, "Rosa, there must always be a door we can go out of." Her thin hands tightened on the bag. "He is gone now, but I keep the door, Rosa." Marisol filed the name away with the same care she filed everything, and printed the balance slip, and did not charge the woman the $2 fee for an in-person inquiry, because that fee was also waivable, and also, she was beginning to suspect, not always being waived for people like Rosa. "Miss Vega." The voice cut across the floor, bright and hard. Greg Hollis, the branch manager, crossing from his glass office with the brisk walk of a man about to make a point in front of an audience. "When you have a moment." The whole branch was listening now. It was the cheapest entertainment the day offered. "I'll just be 1 minute, Mr. Hollis. Now, please." He stopped at her window, looked at Rosa, the coat, the scarf, the resoled shoes, the whole of her, with an expression that did not bother to hide itself, and then pitched his voice so the line could hear it. "We have 19 people waiting on revenue-generating transactions, and you're running balance slips for the smallest pause, the cruelest kind, the kind that makes you supply the insult yourself. Walk-ins. The clientele we prioritize reflects the image of this branch. I'd think someone in your position would understand the value of making a good impression. Someone in your position." There it was, the thing under the thing, the comment he could always reach for and never quite have to say. Marisol felt the old heat climb her neck. She did not let it reach her face. She had 34 years of practice at not letting it reach her face. "Of course, Mr. Hollis," she said evenly. "I'm finishing up with Rosa, and then I'll catch up the line." "Rosa," he repeated, as if the fact that Marisol knew the woman's name were itself the problem. He gave Rosa one more dismissive glance and turned on his heel. And as he went, Marisol heard him say it. Just loud enough, the way men like Greg Hollis always make sure it's just loud enough. "Find out if the old woman even has the bus fare home before you waste any more time on her." The line tittered. Daniela smothered a laugh. And Rosa, who had understood every word, lowered her eyes to her bag and held it a little tighter, and said nothing, because she had clearly spent a long life learning that there was no profit in answering people like Greg Hollis, only further cost. Marisol slid the balance slip across the counter and put her hand, just for a moment, flat on the counter beside the old woman's. Not touching, just near. "You have a good day, Rosa," she said quietly. "Your door's still there. I'll keep an eye on it for you." She did not know, when she said it, that she was making a promise she would nearly die keeping. She did not know that the $4.11 was a single loose thread hanging off the bottom of something enormous, or that she had just become the only person in the city who had pulled it. She knew only that an old woman in a worn coat had walked into a building full of people who served money for a living, and that every one of them had looked at her and seen nothing, and that they were all about to find out how completely wrong a roomful of people could be. Because outside, in the grey noon light, a long, dark car had pulled to the curb across the street, and the man in the back of it had been watching the bank's glass front for the better part of an hour, waiting for a small, bent woman in a headscarf to come out. A woman he had been quietly, desperately looking for, a woman who did not want to be found. Not even by him, especially not by him. Rosa gathered her slip, and her bag, and her dignity, and made her slow way toward the door. And the man in the car sat forward. To understand why Marisol Vega noticed $4.11 when the entire banking system was built so that no one would, you have to understand that she had spent her whole life being the person other people didn't bother to look at, and had learned, from the inside, exactly how much you can see from there. She was 34, and she had been overlooked in one way or another since she was a girl. A heavy child in a family of small, sharp people. A quiet woman. Now, in a body the world had decided in advance was a kind of failure of discipline. She had stopped fighting it a long time ago. Not because she'd surrendered, but because she'd discovered something the people doing the glancing never would. Being looked past was a vantage point. People did their truest things in front of you once they'd decided you didn't count. She had watched co-workers pocket things, watched managers lie, watched the cruel relax into themselves because the fat girl at the end window wasn't anybody worth performing for. She saw the bank the way Rosa saw it, from underneath, where the machinery showed. She had taken the job 6 years ago for ordinary reasons. It was steady, it had insurance, and the insurance mattered because Marisol's mother, 2 years into a slow unkindness of a disease, needed it. Marisol spent her evenings helping a woman who had never once in 34 years told her she was proud of her get from the chair to the bed, and she spent her days being told, in 100 small ways, that she was a cost the branch tolerated rather than a person it valued. She had made a kind of peace with both. It was not happiness, but it was hers, built board by board, and there was a quiet dignity in that which Greg Hollis would never understand, because men like Greg Hollis had never had to build anything. And there was the other thing. The thing that made her stay at the end window when she could have climbed. It was where they sent the people who could be robbed. She had not had a word for it at first. It came to her slowly, the way you notice a draft before you find the gap. The customers they routed to her were not just unprofitable. They were unwatched. No grown children scrutinizing statements. No advisors. No one who would ever call the bank's fraud line, because they didn't know there was one, because they'd been taught their whole lives that when a bank took your money it was called a fee and you said thank you. They were the softest targets in the entire institution, and the institution had, with the bland efficiency of all institutions, gathered them in one place and assigned them to the one teller least equipped to make trouble about it. They had miscalculated. They had assumed the woman at the end window was least equipped to make trouble. They had not considered that she was best equipped to see. That night, after her mother was asleep, Marisol got out the cheap notebook she kept for the small accounts. Her own, a private ledger of a thing she had never quite admitted she was building, and started writing down names. Mr. Aldous, the Petrosian sisters, the Nakamura account, dormant since a death, old Mr. Whitfield, who came in every third Thursday and called her the kind one. Rosa, now. 11 names she could call up from memory, because she had served every one of them herself. And against each name she wrote the fees that had appeared. Small, regular. The $4 subtractions no algorithm would flag because they sat below the threshold the algorithm was tuned to catch. The threshold Marisol happened to know because part of her job was knowing it. By midnight she had a column of numbers, and the column had a shape. The fees did not appear at random. They appeared on a cycle, posted the 3rd week of the month, always to accounts with no electronic statements, always to balances in a certain modest band, never to anyone who had logged into online banking in the past year. Someone had built a filter. Someone had asked the system a very specific question. Show me the people who will never look. And the system had answered, without conscience, and someone had been quietly harvesting $4 at a time from people chosen precisely because the loss would never be felt by anyone with the power to be angry about it. Marisol did the multiplication, and then did it again because the first answer didn't feel real, and understood she was looking at the outline of a theft large enough to buy a house a year, assembled entirely out of sums too small for any single victim to fight over. A machine for turning contempt into money. They had not stolen from people because they were poor. They had stolen from them because they were unseen. The poverty wasn't the target. The invisibility was. She looked at the 11 names. Ordinary people. People who, like her, had learned to make themselves small and quiet and grateful because smallness was safer than being a target, and who had been turned into targets precisely because they'd made themselves small. One of them was a woman in a worn wool coat who held her handbag like a door she was guarding. There must always be a door we can go out of. Marisol closed the notebook. The smart thing. The safe thing. The thing a woman with a sick mother and an end-window job and no allies could not afford to do, was to put it in a drawer and forget the column of numbers. She knew what happened to tellers who asked the wrong questions about the bank's own money. Every practical fact of her life told her to look away. And then she did the thing she had decided, somewhere back in childhood, that she would always do, no matter what it cost. Because she knew, better than anyone in that bank, exactly what it was like to be a name on a list that no one would ever read. She made a copy of the page. She did not know that one of the 11 names belonged to the mother of the most dangerous man in the city. She did not know that the woman had hidden herself in plain sight precisely because of who her son was, choosing a worn coat and a dormant account over the gilded cage he kept trying to put her in. She did not know that the small, steady theft she had uncovered was not the whole of the thing, but the surface of it. That someone had reached into the machine and, very deliberately, added a single name that did not belong with the others, for reasons that had nothing to do with $4. She knew only that 11 people had been robbed because no one would look. She had spent her whole life being no one. She was going to look. The trouble started, as trouble in banks always does, with a flag on a screen. Marisol had been at her window 2 hours the next morning when the system locked Rosa's account. She saw it happen in real time. The status icon changing color, under review, the 31-year-old door swinging quietly shut, and the cold thing in her chest sharpened into fear. Because an account did not go under review by accident, and it did not go under review the morning after a teller had noticed a fee that wasn't supposed to be there. Somebody had watched her watch it. And then, at 10:40, Rosa came back. She came straight to the end window this time, past Tyler, past the velvet rope, with the careful determination of a woman who had decided the kind one was the only one. "They sent me a letter," she said, and laid it on the counter. Bank letterhead, cold and formal. Irregular activity. Account frozen pending review. It came this morning. By a man, to my door. Not by post. Her thin hands flattened the page. "I have lived in that room 11 years, and no one from the bank has ever known where my door is. But this came by a man's hand, this morning. Someone knows where I live now, and they did not know yesterday." Marisol's mouth went dry. Rosa had understood it faster than she had. The freeze and the letter and the man at the door were not a process. They were a message. "We see you. Stop." "Rosa," she said low, leaning in, all pretense of ordinary transaction gone. "Something's wrong with your account, and I don't think it's only yours. I think someone here has been taking small amounts from people who don't check. And yesterday, when I pulled your account, I saw it, and I think someone saw me see it. The safest thing right now is not to fight this here, today. Let me. Miss Vega." Greg Hollis's voice again, but thinner this morning, brighter, pulled too tight. He was crossing toward her fast, and there were 2 men behind him she didn't recognize, men in good suits who did not move like bankers. Step away from the window. Now. The branch had gone quiet. Not the entertained quiet of yesterday. A different quiet. "Marisol Vega," Hollis said, and he said her full name, which he had never once done, and she understood he was performing for the men behind him, that he was frightened of them. "You accessed a flagged account yesterday without authorization. You printed customer records. We have reason to believe you've been improperly handling fee structures on a number of accounts, and," his voice caught on the size of the lie he'd been handed, "that you may have been altering them. For your own benefit. Security is going to escort you from the floor while we conduct an audit." The accusation was so exactly backward that for a moment she could only stare. They had taken the thing she'd discovered, the fees switched on, and inverted it into a thing she'd done. The waiver was her signature. She had waived those fees 19 times. Her name was all over the accounts. They were going to use her own decency as the evidence of her crime. And it would work, because who would the bank believe? The fat teller at the end window, or the clean men in the good suits? "That's not," she started. "You don't have to say anything," Hollis said, almost kindly, the kindness of a man who has decided you're already finished. It'll go easier if you don't. And Rosa, who had stood at the counter through all of it, watching the suits, watching the manager's tight, bright fear, watching the kind one turned in the space of a sentence from a helper into a thief, set down her vinyl bag on the counter. And she straightened. It was a small thing, physically. A bent old woman drawing herself up, perhaps 2 inches. But something came into the worn coat and the headscarf that had not been there a moment before, some old authority surfacing through 30 years of careful hiding. And when she spoke, her careful coin-counted English had changed its weight entirely. "You will take your hands off nothing," Rosa said quietly, "until my son arrives." Greg Hollis blinked. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern. He is parking the car. He does not like how I live. We argue about it. He has been following me for 3 days, this stubborn boy, because he worries. And today, for the first time in 11 years, I am glad he did not listen to me." The door of the branch opened. Marisol would remember, for the rest of her life, the exact quality of the silence that came in with him. Not the silence of fear, at first. Most of the room didn't know him yet. It was the silence of a space rearranging itself around a center of gravity it could feel before it could see. The 2 men in the good suits felt it first. She watched the color leave their faces in the same instant. Then Hollis, turning, his bright, tight performance collapsing as he registered who had just walked into his branch. He was perhaps 50, silver coming in at the temples, in a dark coat that had not come off any rack, and he moved through the velvet ropes without appearing to notice they were there, the way water doesn't notice a fence. He carried, in one hand, a heavy canvas duffel bag, the kind of bag that is always, in the end, full of exactly one thing. And he did not look at Hollis, or the suits, or the frozen tellers, or the duffel he set down on the polished floor with a soft and terrible weight. He looked at the small, bent woman in the worn coat. And the most dangerous man in the city crossed the floor of the bank, and his face did something no one in that building would have believed it could do. "Mama," Raphael Conti said, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. I told you to let me take care of this." He took the old woman's hands in both of his, the worn handbag pressed between them, and for one moment the whole gilded room watched the most feared man in the city stand in a worn woman's worth and call her mother. And watched, in the same instant, every assumption they had made about the beggar in the resoled shoes turn to ash in their mouths. Rosa let him hold her hands. Then she lifted her chin toward Marisol, who stood frozen at the end window with a security guard's hand hovering near her elbow. "This one," Rosa said to her son, in the voice of a woman delivering the only verdict that mattered. "This one was kind to me when she thought I was nothing." When all of them, her old eyes swept the branch, Hollis, the suits, the tellers gone silent. When all of them looked at my coat. This one looked at me. And now they are calling her a thief. To make her quiet. I want to know why, Raphael. I want to know what is happening in this bank that they would close my door and break this girl in the same morning. And I think. She turned her clear old eyes back to Marisol. I think this one already knows. Raphael Conti turned, for the first time, and looked at the teller at the end window. Really looked, with an attention that had nothing dismissive in it and nothing grateful either, an attention that was simply, completely seeing her, perhaps the first time anyone in that building ever had. "Take your hand off her," he said to the security guard, without raising his voice, and the hand was gone before the sentence finished. He came to the end window and set both palms flat on the counter where, a day before, Marisol had laid her hand near his mother's. "My mother does not say kind about anyone. In 30 years I have heard her say it twice." His dark eyes held hers. "So I am going to ask you a question, and I want the truth, because I think you are the only person in this building who has been telling it. What did you see?" And Marisol, who had a sick mother and an end-window job and no allies, who had every practical reason to say nothing, looked at the man with the duffel bag and at the old woman who had straightened her spine to defend her and made the second decision in 2 days that would nearly cost her everything. I'll tell you what I saw, but not because you're frightening, and not for that bag on the floor. I don't want it, and you can take it back out the way you carried it in." She straightened at her own end window in her own worn dignity. "I'll tell you because 11 people got robbed for being invisible. Your mother's one of them, and I'm another, and I am done being a name on a list nobody reads. I'll show you everything, but we do it my way. You don't fix this with that bag, or with whatever it is men like you do to make problems disappear. Because if Raphael Conti makes my problem disappear, then I'm just the teller the Mafia saved, and the next invisible person on that list gets robbed next month, and nothing changes." Her voice did not shake. "I don't want to be saved. I want to burn the machine down, and I'm the only one who can read how it's built. So those are my terms." For a long moment, Raphael Conti looked at the woman who had just refused his money, his protection, and his name in a single breath, in front of a branch full of people who would have wept with gratitude for any one of the three. And then, slowly, the most dangerous man in the city inclined his head, the way one careful person acknowledges another. And a thing that was almost respect, and almost a smile, moved at the corner of his mouth. "My mother," he said, "is an excellent judge of character. All right, Miss Vega, your way." He glanced once at Greg Hollis, who had gone the color of the marble floor. "Though I think you'll find that doing it your way and doing it mine are about to become very difficult to tell apart." He did not take her anywhere dramatic. That was the first thing that surprised her about working with Raphael Conti. She had braced for a warehouse, the theater of dangerous men. And instead, he took her to a quiet accountant's office above a bakery, a clean, ordinary room that smelled of bread and toner, that belonged, he said, to no one whose name would ever appear on a document near his. "You said you wanted to read the machine," he said, setting a laptop on the table. "I have people who understand money. I do not have anyone who understands the people the money is being taken from. My accountants looked at those accounts a month ago and saw nothing. You looked for 10 minutes and saw everything. I would like to understand the difference." So she showed him her cheap notebook beside his expensive laptop, and taught a man who broke people for a living how to see the way she saw. "Your accountants looked for theft, big numbers, missing money, the shape of a crime. They didn't find it because there isn't one, not the way they were looking. This thing never takes enough from anyone to be a theft. $4. Amounts a person writes off as the cost of being poor. It's 1,000 paper cuts on 1,000 people who've been taught not to complain about paper cuts." She turned the notebook toward him. "You can only see it if you already know these people. If you know this account doesn't carry a maintenance charge, that the Petrosians haven't logged in since 2019. You have to know them as people first. And nobody who works at that bank does. Except me. Because I'm the one they sent to the end window. They built a weapon," Raphael said slowly, "out of contempt. They took the exact thing that made these people easy to ignore and turned it into the thing that made them easy to rob." "That's exactly it," Marisol said, surprised he'd arrived there so cleanly. "I know something about being underestimated as a strategy," he said, and did not elaborate, and she did not ask. They worked. Over 2 days, in the room that smelled of bread, Marisol pulled the shape of it into the light, better than she had ever been allowed to be, because for the first time someone was letting her be good, handing her resources and listening when she spoke. His people could get her things no teller could see. Transaction logs, internal authorizations, the digital fingerprints of who had switched which fees on and when. And she could do the thing they couldn't. Look at the cold data and see the warm pattern underneath. Along the way, she learned things about the accounts themselves that his accountants had never thought to ask, including how an account this old actually opened. "A dormant dead man's account like Rosa's," she told him, half to herself, reading a systems manual, "doesn't open with a password. The old ones verify the holder with a challenge sequence. Something only the account holder can answer, set when the account was made. It's how they protected people before there were pins. You can't just take the money. The holder has to prove she's the one who guarded it. She filed it away as a curiosity. It would, in 3 days, save her life. "Here," she said, on the second evening, and something in her voice made him look up. "The fees are switched on by a batch process. Automated. Runs the 3rd week of every month, hits the filtered accounts, takes its little bite. It's been running almost 3 years. Clean, cold, a machine. You could prosecute it in an afternoon." She paused. "But look at this account." She turned the screen toward him. Rosa's. "Your mother's account doesn't match the others. The batch touched it too. The $4 fee. But only starting last month. 3 years the machine's been running, and it never touched Rosa until 4 weeks ago. And then suddenly it's added to the filter. By hand." She pointed. "Someone manually inserted your mother into a list of invisible people who get robbed by a machine. The machine didn't find her. Someone put her there. And whoever did it had access above the branch level, because the override is logged to an administrative credential, not a teller's." The room was very quiet. Below, the bakery's ovens ticked as they cooled. "You're telling me the theft from the poor is real," Raphael said, his voice gone flat and careful. "But my mother's name was added to it deliberately. By someone with access I don't control. $4 was never the point, for her. Somebody didn't add Rosa to that list to take $4. They added her because it was a quiet, deniable, automated way to do something else to her account, to flag it, freeze it, surface it, get a man to her door with a letter. The robbery of the poor is real, and we're going to burn it down. But somebody used it. Somebody hid one deliberate act inside 3 years of automated ones, because the safest place to hide a single targeted thing is in the middle of 1,000 random ones." She met his eyes. "Somebody wanted to reach your mother and didn't want you to see them do it." Raphael sat with that, and Marisol watched something move behind his stillness that she recognized, because she'd felt it the night she did the multiplication. The cold arrival of a truth larger and worse than the one you came in with. "My mother hides," he said finally, almost to himself. "For 11 years she has refused to let me protect her. She says the safest place for her is where no one would look for the mother of Raphael Conti. A worn coat. A dormant account. Nothing worth a second glance." His jaw tightened. Her invisibility was the wall she hid behind, and someone just used it as the door they came in through. Then they know her the way I knew the others. They didn't find her by looking for your mother. They found her by looking for someone exactly the way she made herself look. Which means whoever did this understands the machine well enough to hide inside it, and knew your mother chose to live like one of these 11 people. That's not an outsider, Mr. Conti. An outsider couldn't get an administrative credential and wouldn't know your mother chose to become invisible. The implications sat in the room between them, too large to say out loud yet. Raphael went to the window and looked down at the ordinary street for a while. When he spoke again, the flat carefulness was gone, replaced by something she would come to recognize as the most dangerous thing about him. Not his anger, but his patience. "I could have ended this on the first morning. The people who froze my mother's account would have told me everything by nightfall, and the name would have had a very bad week. You stopped me. You said your way, and I let you, because my mother told me to, and because you refused the bag, which interested me more than I expected." He looked at her. "But you've asked me to move slowly while someone who has already reached my mother once is still out there, knowing we're looking. That is the hardest thing you could ask of me. Tell me you're sure it's worth the time it costs." Marisol thought of her mother, asleep in the small apartment, breathing through a disease the bank's insurance barely covered. She thought of the 11 names. She thought of Rosa straightening her spine in a worn coat to defend a stranger. If you make it disappear your way, you save Rosa, you feel better, and in a month the machine finds another invisible person and starts again. And the next one doesn't have a son with a duffel bag. The only way it ends is if it dies in the light, with proof where it can't be buried. And the only person who can put it there is someone who can read it. That's me. We do it slow, and we do it right, and we do it where everyone can see. He studied her a long moment, then nodded once, and something passed between them that was too sharp-edged for warmth but was its serious older cousin: recognition. Two people who had each, in their different worlds, learned that being underestimated was a blade you could pick up by the right end. It was nearly midnight when he had a car take her home. As she gathered her notebook, he said, almost casually, in the voice of a man not used to saying such things, "Hollis, he called you a thief in front of my mother. I want you to know I haven't done anything about that. It's been very difficult, not doing anything about that." Marisol almost smiled. "Hold that thought. I have a much better use for him than whatever you're imagining." And only later, in the car, in the dark, did she let herself feel the thing she'd been holding off. Not fear of the machine, but the quieter danger sitting beside it. That for the first time in her adult life, someone had looked at her and seen, not a cost to be tolerated, but a person worth listening to. And that it had been him. And that a woman who had spent her whole life unseen could lose her footing fast in the warmth of finally being looked at. And she had a machine to burn down, and could not afford to lose her footing now. The administrative credential belonged to a man named Russell Tan, and Marisol knew him, which was the part that hurt. Not well. You did not know anyone well at that bank, but she knew Russell. Operations, second floor, a soft, anxious man in his 40s with a photograph of 2 daughters on his desk and a habit of saying sorry before he'd done anything wrong. Over 6 years, he had been one of the few who was simply neutral to her. Not kind, but not cruel, which at that bank had felt almost like friendship. The credential that had manually inserted Rosa into the filter was his. "It's too clean," Marisol said, when Raphael's people brought her the log. Russell couldn't have built this. His credential built it. His credential was used to build it. Those aren't the same thing, and you of all people know they aren't. She turned to him. Russell Tan is an operations clerk who apologizes to the coffee machine. The batch process that's been harvesting these accounts for 3 years is patient and elegant. Whoever designed it tuned every theft to sit $1 under the fraud threshold. That's not Russell. But Russell would absolutely be the man you'd choose to blame. Anxious, mid-level, real access, no power, 2 daughters to be frightened for. His is the credential you'd want holding the knife. So she went to see him. Alone, against Raphael's strong objection, because Russell would tell a frightened teller things he'd never tell one of Conti's men. She caught him in the parking garage after close, and the moment he saw her, his soft, anxious face filled, instantly, with guilt and terror, the specific look of a man who has been waiting, every day, to be caught. "You can't be here," Russell whispered. "They're saying you altered the fees. They have your waivers." "I know what they're saying, Russell. I know you know it's backward, too. Your credential added Rosa Conti to that filter 4 weeks ago, and you've been sick about it ever since. And I think it's the only genuinely wrong thing you've ever done, and I think someone made you do it." She kept her voice gentle, because gentleness was the only key that fit a lock like Russell Tan. "I'm not here to turn you in. I'm here because you're drowning, and I know the difference between a man who built a machine and a man who got fed into one. Tell me who handed you the name." And Russell Tan slid down a concrete pillar and came apart. It came out the way it always does. A leak, not a confession. He hadn't built anything. He'd found out the batch process existed by accident 18 months ago and gone to his supervisor about it, frightened, doing the right thing. And his supervisor had listened very kindly and thanked him. And 3 days later, Russell had been quietly informed that there were irregularities in his department that could become a problem for a man with 2 daughters and a mortgage, unless he understood that certain things were better left alone. So he'd left them alone. For 18 months, sick with it. They'd let him stew precisely so that when they needed a credential for something ugly, they'd have a man already broken to the bridle. 4 weeks ago, he gave me a name, Russell whispered. Rosa Conti. An account number. Told me to add it to the filter, just like the others, nothing special. I didn't know who she was. I swear to God, I didn't know whose mother she was. I just knew it was wrong, one more wrong thing, and I was so tired of being afraid that I did it. He pressed his hands to his face. And then she came in, and then he came in with that bag, and I've been waiting 4 weeks to die. Who, Russell? Marisol crouched in front of him, level with him. Who gave you the name? Who's the supervisor who buried what you reported? His name's Dominic Hale. Regional fee operations. He built the batch thing. He threatened me. Russell swallowed. But he's frightened too. The day after I added the Conti name, he aged 10 years. He runs the machine, but he didn't put that woman in it. Somebody made him, the same way he made me. He told me once, drunk, that the machine used to be just business. That somebody'd started using it for something that was going to get them all killed. And there it was. Marisol crouched in the garage and felt the whole shape of the thing rotate and show her its other face. Russell was confessing, and Dominic Hale was real, and a simpler story would have ended right here. The clerk, the corrupt manager, the machine that robs the poor. A complete crime, gift-wrapped. It was the hand. It was not the architect. Dominic Hale runs the machine, she said slowly. He built it to rob the invisible for money. Patient, careful, 3 years without a mistake. A man that careful doesn't suddenly hand-insert the mother of Raphael Conti into his own machine. That's not greed. That's a death wish. Unless somebody made him. Somebody he's more afraid of than he is of Conti. She stood. Who is Hale afraid of? Russell. Who's above a regional fee manager? I don't know. Hale never said a name. But once, he said one thing. He said it's somebody close to the Contis. He said whoever it was didn't just want to rob the old woman. He said they wanted to know where she keeps her door. Russell looked up, baffled. I don't know what it means. Where she keeps her door. But Hale said it like it was the most dangerous sentence he'd ever heard. Marisol went very still. Because she knew exactly what it meant. She had heard Rosa say it herself, holding a vinyl bag to her chest. There must always be a door we can go out of. An emergency account. A door. Something Rosa's husband had set up long ago, that she'd guarded for 31 years, that had nothing to do with $4 and everything to do with whatever a woman married to that kind of man might need to escape, or hide, or leave behind for a son. Go home, Russell. Take your daughters somewhere for a few days, when this opens up. And it's going to, soon. You're going to tell the truth about the credential and the name and the 18 months. Not to save yourself. To save the next frightened man they break. You did one wrong thing in a long, decent life, and you've been dying of it. The way you stop is you stop letting your fear be the handle they hold you by. She helped him up. I stopped letting mine be a handle 2 days ago, in front of a whole branch. Your turn's coming. She walked out into the night and called Raphael, her voice very steady. It isn't the clerk, and it isn't even the manager who runs the machine. They're both hands. The machine's been robbing the poor for 3 years for money, and we'll burn it down, but it's not the thing. Somebody used the machine to go looking for your mother's door. The emergency account your father set up. They don't want $4. They want what's behind that door, and they wanted to find it without you ever seeing them look. And the manager who built the machine is more afraid of them than of you, which means it's someone you'd never suspect. Someone close enough to the family to know your mother chose to disappear, and close enough to know that door exists at all. She let it land. There's only a small handful of people who could know both those things. You've just been hoping, the way I hoped about Russell, that it isn't one of them. The line was silent a long moment. My father's door, Raphael said finally, and his voice had gone somewhere young, the voice of a son. There are 4 people alive who know that account exists. My mother, me, and 2 men my father trusted with his life, who I have trusted with mine ever since. Then I'm sorry, Marisol said gently, because one of them has been in your house, at your table, helping you look for your mother, while already knowing exactly where her door is. His name was Matteo Ricci, and he had carried Raphael Conti as a child on his shoulders, and he was the one helping Raphael search for Rosa. Raphael told her this in the room above the bakery, late, the way a man reads his own autopsy, flatly, holding very still so the size of it wouldn't show. 2 men his father had trusted with his life. One was Bruno, 70 now, half-blind, who had not had a clear thought about a bank credential in a decade. And one was Matteo, 60, sharp as a blade, who had run the family's legitimate money for 30 years. The clean money, the banks and holdings and careful legal architecture that let a dangerous man's fortune sleep in respectable places. Matteo knew every account the Contes had ever opened, including a dormant emergency account set up by a dead man for a wife who might one day need a door. Matteo, who for 3 months had sat at Raphael's table every week, gravely concerned, helping his godson search the city for a stubborn old woman, while already knowing precisely how to find her, because he was the one who'd reached out through a regional fee manager and a frightened clerk to put her name in a machine. "He has been managing my search," Raphael said, the words coming out like something extracted. "Every lead I chased," he suggested. "He has spent 3 months making sure I looked everywhere except the one place a man who robs the invisible would think to look. He held me at my father's grave when I was 11. He taught me to knot a tie. And he has spent 3 months helping me hunt for my mother so that he could find her first." "Why?" Marisol asked. Not why hadn't he seen it? You don't search the hands that carried you. Why was Matteo doing it at all? "My father's door." Raphael's jaw worked. "My mother thinks it's an emergency account, a few documents in a box. It isn't. My father was a careful man in a dangerous business, and the thing he built behind that door is a record. 30 years of who he paid and who paid him. Every politician and judge and banker the family ever owned or was owned by. He left it to my mother as protection. If they ever come for you, Rosa, this is what keeps you safe. She has guarded it for 31 years without ever understanding she's been sitting on the one thing that could burn down half the city." A terrible pause. "And Matteo has known what's behind that door for 30 years. He helped my father build it." The room was very quiet. Below, the ovens ticked. "He's not robbing your mother," Marisol said slowly, the architecture turning over to show its true scale. "He wants what's behind the door. 30 years of names. The thing that could destroy everyone in it or protect whoever holds it. After 30 years of being the loyal one, the clean one who manages the money, he's decided to stop serving the Contes and become the power behind them. And the one thing between him and that is a box only your mother can open. So he used the bank's machine to find her, quietly, while keeping you looking in every wrong direction. And my mother is the key," Raphael said. "Not a witness. The key. He cannot open that door without her." His eyes came up, and there was something in them now that frightened her more than the duffel bag ever could, which means he was never going to be able to simply rob her. At some point, he was always going to have to take her. And that was the moment the phone rang. Raphael looked at the screen, and the blood left his face. He set it on the table and answered without speaking, and a voice came out. Warm, cultured, grandfatherly, the voice of a man who had taught a boy to knot a tie. "Raphael, you've been letting a bank teller do your thinking. I confess I didn't see that coming. I underestimated the fat girl at the end window. But then, so did everyone, which was rather the point of using her bank." A pause. "I have your mother, Figlio. She's quite comfortable. I've explained there's a small matter of a key, and that you'd very much like her to cooperate, and she has told me. You'll appreciate this, that I can go to the devil. Magnificent woman. She'll change her mind. Everyone does, when the alternative is watching someone they love pay for the refusal. So, you come to me, alone, and you bring the only other person who understands what your father built. Yes, I know about the teller's little notebook, and the two of you persuade Rosa to open her door. Or I begin demonstrating, on each of you in turn, how persuasive I can be. 2 hours. And don't bring men. I taught you everything you know about bringing men. I'll see them coming before they clear the gate." The line went dead. For a moment, neither moved. Then Raphael stood, and Marisol watched him reach, at last, for the thing he'd been holding back since the first morning. The violence, the finality, the version of himself the whole city feared. "Stay here. I'll bring men he won't see. I'll take the house apart. I have ended men more careful than Matteo, and I will end him and bring my mother home, and you will never have to." "Raphael," she did not shout. "If you go in like the thing the city is afraid of, men, force, ending Matteo in a room, what happens to the record behind your mother's door?" He stopped. "It doesn't disappear. It's still out there. A box of 30 years of names that half the city would kill to control, and the only person who can open it is a frightened old woman who'll have just watched another man she trusted die in front of her. You'll have saved her body and handed her a second nightmare. And the machine at the bank, robbing 1,100 invisible people right now, tonight, keeps running because you'll have spent everything ending one man in the dark instead of dragging the whole thing into the light." She came around the table. Matteo built his whole plan on one assumption, the same one Hale made, Hollis made, the whole city makes, that the way to win is force, and that he understands force better than anyone. That's why he told you not to bring men. Men are the only weapon he believes you have. He's already won the fight you're about to start. He's been planning for it 30 years. Then what would you have me do? He has my mother. 2 hours. He told you to bring the only other person who understands the door. Me. So bring me. But not as your accomplice. Matteo thinks he's summoning a teller to help crack an old woman. He thinks I'm a tool you found. She felt it assembling in the air, late and complete, the way the column of numbers had. He's spent his whole life around men who win with force, and he has no idea what it means to be underestimated as a strategy. To be the person everyone in the room has already decided is harmless. I've been that person my entire life. You don't bring force into that house. You bring the one weapon Matteo has never once respected and will therefore never see coming. You bring the invisible woman. He'll have my mother in that house. If this goes wrong, then it goes wrong with both of us in the room instead of you alone in a war you've already been outplanned in. She picked up her cheap notebook, folded the page of 11 names, and put it in her pocket like a key. He didn't even look at the bank, Raphael. He just used it. The same way they all use the people they don't see. He's never, in 30 years, looked at the bottom of anything. And the bottom is the only place I've ever lived. For a long moment, Raphael Conti stood torn between the man the city feared and the thing this quiet woman was asking him to become. A man who walks into the worst room of his life, trusting the least powerful person in it to be the most dangerous. "Her way," he said finally, the words costing him everything he was built from. "All right, her way. One last time." And then, lower, in the voice of the son and not the boss, "If he touches either of them, Marisol, my mother or you, there is no door deep enough in this world for Matteo Ricci to go out of." Matteo Ricci's house was the kind that had never once seen a worn coat, and that was the first thing Marisol understood walking into it. A man who had spent 30 years standing close to enormous wealth and decided, somewhere along the way, that proximity was an insult he was owed the cure for. He received them in a long room full of beautiful things, and Rosa was there, seated in a high-backed chair with a cup of tea going cold beside her, her vinyl handbag still pressed to her chest, her chin up, whole, unharmed, furious in the still, banked way of a woman who had survived worse men and knew it. When she saw Marisol, her old eyes flickered. Surprise, then something that settled when she read Marisol's face into a terrible patient calm. She knows, Marisol thought. She's reading me the way I read her. She knows I'm here to do something, and she's going to give me the room. Raphael. Matteo rose, warm, expansive, a silver-haired man with a grandfather's face and a tailor's coat. He embraced his godson, who let himself be embraced, and Marisol watched the cost of that on Raphael's face and filed it away. And the famous teller, smaller than I pictured. Or, no, a small smile. Larger, I suppose. Forgive me. Sit. We're family here, or near enough, and family resolves things over tea. They sat. Marisol arranged herself the way she had arranged herself her whole life in rooms that had decided she didn't matter. Soft, settled, harmless, a heavy woman folding her hands in her lap and lowering her eyes. She let Matteo see exactly what he expected. It was the easiest performance she'd ever given, because it wasn't a performance at all. She simply stopped taking up space he thought he was owed, and his attention slid off her like water off glass and went back to the only two people he considered real. "Here is where we are," Matteo said, pouring tea he did not offer them. "Rosa holds the key to a door your father built. Behind it is a thing I helped build and have waited 30 years to inherit because your father was sentimental and left it to a woman instead of the man who understood its worth. I am done being patient. The record opens tonight. Your mother gives me the key, or I begin to make the evening unpleasant in ways I'd honestly prefer to avoid. So, Rosa, the key." "I have told you," Rosa said, accent thick and steady. "I do not have a key. I have an old account my husband made me promise to keep. I do not know what is behind any door. I am an old woman with a bus pass. Rosa, we are past that." And this was the moment Marisol had walked into the house to reach, because Matteo had made the assumption every powerful man in this story had made. Hollis, Hale, the whole Gilded Bank, the entire city. And it was about to cost him everything. He had brought the invisible woman into the room and forgotten she was there. "She's telling the truth," Marisol said. Matteo looked at her with the mild surprise you'd give a chair that had spoken. "She doesn't have a key. Not the way you think." She kept her voice soft and ordinary, a teller explaining a routine matter. "An account that old doesn't open with a key Rosa carries in her bag. It opens with a verification, a challenge sequence set when the account was made that only the holder can answer, on demand. I know, because I spent 2 days inside that bank's systems, and these old dead man's accounts all work the same way. You've spent 30 years knowing what's behind the door, but you never learned how it opens, because Rosa's husband never told you. He told her. Only her. That's the whole point of giving it to her instead of you." Matteo's grandfather face had gone very still. "So even if she wanted to give it to you," Marisol went on, gently, "even if you hurt her, hurt all of us, she can't hand you a key. She has to open it herself, at a terminal, with a verification only she knows. And here's the part your whole plan never accounted for, because it lives in the one place you've been too important your whole life to look. The smallest pause, the cruelest kind, the kind that makes a man supply his own conclusion. These accounts were built with a second sequence, a duress answer. If the holder verifies under coercion, frightened, at gunpoint, it doesn't open the door, it triggers it, seals the record permanently and flags the institution. The man who designed it knew exactly which of his friends he was protecting it from. You can't force this, Mr. Ricky. You never could. You've spent 30 years planning to take by force a thing that, by design, can only be given freely. The verification was real. She'd seen it in the systems manual 2 nights ago and filed it away. The duress sequence she had invented, whole, in the car, betting her life and Rosa's on a single fact she did know, that a man like Matteo Ricci, who had spent 30 years above the machinery, who used banks but had never once been a clerk in one, did not know enough about how these accounts actually worked to know where the truth stopped and the bluff began. He knew what the money was. He had never had to know how the plumbing ran. That was a thing you only learned at the bottom, at the end window, where they sent the people who didn't matter. She watched him try to find the lie and fail, because half of it was iron true and the other half lived in the one place he'd never thought to look. And she watched the 30-year plan begin, very slightly, to come apart in his hands. "You're bluffing," Matteo said. But he said it half a second too late. "Maybe. You'd know if you'd ever spent a day behind a teller's window. Have you?" She let it hang. "But think it through. The harder you push, Rosa, the more permanently that record locks. Hurting her gets you nothing. Hurting Raphael gets you nothing. Hurting me gets you nothing. You need us alive and willing, and we're not willing. So what you've actually got is a kidnapping, a bank fraud scheme 3 years deep with your name now threaded through it, and about. She glanced, mild, at a clock. 40 minutes before the people holding copies of everything start making calls if I don't walk out that door. This last was also a bluff. It also landed because the first one had. And Rosa, who had sat through all of it reading Marisol's face, understanding before anyone else what the teller was building, chose her moment with the timing of a woman who had been married to a dangerous man for 40 years and knew exactly when to put her weight on the scale. Matteo, you held my Raphael at his father's grave, and you came into my son's house every week with your sad face and helped him look for me, knowing where I was. She rose, 2 inches of an old woman straightening into something that filled the room. My husband did not give the door to you. Now you know why. He saw what I am only seeing tonight. You will not get the key. Not by force, not by tea, not in 30 more years. Because the one thing you needed, in all your cleverness, was for me to want to help you. And I would sooner take that door to my grave than open it 1 inch for the man who used a machine that robs poor old women to come hunting for me. She lifted her chin. I have been a poor old woman these 11 years, the best years of my life. You should try it, Matteo. It teaches you who is actually watching. For one long, suspended moment, Matteo Ricci stood in his beautiful room holding 2 hours and a 30-year plan and a gun somewhere under his tailored coat, and understood that he had built his entire ambition on the leverage of force, and that the 3 people in front of him had just, between them, quietly removed force from the equation, and that he had let them, because he had brought a teller, into the room and never thought to watch her. What he reached for then was the gun, because it was the only tool a man like Matteo had ever truly trusted. And it was the last mistake in a long evening of them, because Raphael Conti had spent the entire conversation doing the second hardest thing he had ever done, which was nothing, waiting, trusting the invisible woman to dismantle a man with words while he held perfectly still. And the instant Matteo's hand moved, the waiting was over, and the most dangerous man in the city stopped being still. It happened fast, and it happened around Marisol, who did the thing she had done in a bank 2 days before and 100 rooms before that. She put her whole underestimated body between the danger and the people who mattered, broad and immovable, and reached Rosa, and turned the old woman away from it, and held her. So that the last thing Rosa saw was not the end of the man who'd betrayed her husband's memory, but the steady, plain face of the teller who'd been kind to her when she was nothing, when it was over. And it was over quickly, and Marisol did not watch and would not ask. The room was very quiet. Rosa was the one who broke the silence. She took Marisol's face in both her old hands, the vinyl bag fallen forgotten to the floor at last. You opened the door, Rosa said. Not my husband's door. The other one. The one everybody in this city keeps locked. You made the man with the gun feel like the smallest person in the room. I have waited my whole life to see someone do that without a gun of their own. She glanced at her son, then back. He could not. Raphael could not. Only you. Because only you have ever lived where the door actually opens from. And Raphael Conti, who had done the part that was his and left untouched the part that was theirs, looked at the teller from the end window holding his mother in a room full of ruined ambition. For 30 years I trusted the wrong man because he was the most powerful person in every room. And the right one was always the person nobody was looking at. A pause. My mother said you were kind. She was right. But kind was the smallest true thing about you, and it took me until tonight to see the rest. The machine died in the light, the way Marisol had insisted it would. Whatever happened to Matteo Ricci in his beautiful room was Raphael's world and not hers, and she did not ask and did not want to know. But the machine, the patient 3-year theft of $4 at a time from people the world had agreed not to watch, ended where everyone could see it, not in a back room, in the open, with proof, in a way that could not be buried. So she built the case the way she built everything. quietly, thoroughly, from the bottom. Russell Tan told the truth about the credential and the 18 months to people with the power to act on it. Dominic Hale offered the choice between answering to the law and continuing to answer to whatever was left of Matteo Ricci's world, discovered a sudden, deep enthusiasm for cooperation. And Marisol's cheap notebook, 11 names that became hundreds, turned out to be the most dangerous document any of them had ever seen, precisely because it had been assembled by the one person who'd bothered to know the victims as people instead of as accounts below a threshold. More than 1,100 invisible people got their money back. It was not a fortune spread across them. $4 a month, 3 years deep. But Marisol made sure each got a letter, a real one, by post, in plain language, that said in effect, someone was taking this from you because they believed you would never notice, and they were wrong because someone noticed. Mr. Aldous, 90 and half blind, had his granddaughter read it to him twice. Old Mr. Whitfield came in on his next third Thursday and asked for the kind one, and was told, with a new and careful respect, that the kind one did not work the end window anymore. As for the door, the record behind it, 30 years of names that half the city would have killed to hold. Rosa made the decision herself, and made it the way she did everything, without consulting the men who thought it was theirs to decide. She and Raphael opened it together, once, with the verification only she had ever known. And then, against every instinct her son had inherited from the dangerous world that wanted it, Rosa burned it. Your father kept this to keep me safe, she told Raphael. It kept nobody safe. It only made me worth taking. A thing that powerful is not protection, Figlio. It is a target with your mother's name on it. She watched 30 years of leverage become ash in a steel bowl. Let them all wonder, for the rest of their lives, whether it still exists. That is safer than the truth. And I am done being a door anyone can come through. The bank, of course, offered Marisol everything, fast and lavishly, with a great show of having always valued her. Greg Hollis was gone by then, walked out past the velvet ropes he'd loved, and the regional office sent people in good suits to offer her his office, his title, a raise that made her think of 3 years of $4 fees, a written apology, a role designed expressly to make the lawsuit they were terrified of go quietly away. Marisol said no. You didn't build a machine to rob the poor, she told them, because she was a fair woman and the distinction mattered. One man did that. But every one of you built the room he did it in. You sent the people who could be robbed to the window where they'd make the least trouble, and you sent me there with them because you decided I was the same kind of nothing they were. The machine only worked because this whole branch agreed, every single day, not to look at the people at the end window. She closed the folder they'd slid across the desk. I'm not going to take Greg Hollis's office and become the person who decides which customers are worth seeing. I've been on the other side of that decision my whole life. I know exactly what it costs. What she built instead was small and entirely hers. She left the bank, and with a quiet startup loan she never asked the source of and could guess, she opened something the city did not quite have a name for yet. An advocacy practice, a single storefront with her name on the glass, for exactly the people she had spent 6 years watching get robbed at the end window. The old. The poor. The ones with no grown children reading their statements. She read their accounts the way she always had, as people first. She found the small thefts no algorithm flagged, the quiet machinery that runs everywhere money meets contempt. She turned out to be, unsurprisingly to the few who truly knew her, extraordinary at it. There was a waiting list within a year. Her mother lived to see the storefront open. Marisol pushed her wheelchair through the door on the first morning, and the woman who had never in 34 years said she was proud looked up at the name on the glass, Viga a Divocassi, and said nothing, because she was past easy words by then, but reached up and pressed her daughter's hand, hard, once. It was enough. It was the most that had ever been said between them. And Rosa came every week, not because she needed advocacy, but because she had decided, with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had buried a husband and outlasted a traitor, that the kind one was family now, and that was simply that. She sat in the storefront on slow afternoons and told stories about a careful, dangerous man who had built a door to keep her safe, and they drank tea that was actually offered, and Rosa never once let Marisol pay for the bread. And Raphael, she had made wait. Not as a game, but because she had spent her whole life being wanted on other people's terms, valued when convenient and overlooked when not, and she had promised herself she would never again belong to anyone who hadn't first learned to simply see her when there was nothing in it for them. He learned it. That was the thing that undid her. A man the whole city watched with held breath sat in her small storefront on slow afternoons, asking for nothing, helping her sort the accounts of people who would never know his name. Content to be, in that one room, no one at all. And somewhere in a year of slow afternoons she understood that he had become, for her, the one person who looked when no one was making him. He came to the storefront one evening after the last client had gone, and he did not offer her anything. Not money, not protection, not the world he could have laid at her feet. Which was how she knew he had finally understood her completely. "My mother instructed me," he said, "to do this badly, and to bring no bag, so that you would know it was only me." And he took, from his coat, not a duffel and not a ring, but a single worn piece of paper. A page from a cheap notebook, 11 names in her own handwriting, the page she'd folded into her pocket like a key the night she walked into Matteo Ricci's house. He had kept it. "You left this in the car, the night you saved all of us with a lie about a bank. I've carried it for a year. It's the most dangerous thing I've ever held. 11 people the world decided not to see, and the woman who saw them anyway, and brought down everything I couldn't, with nothing but a habit of looking." He set it on the desk between them. "I'm not here to add my name to the list of people who want something from you. I'm here to ask to be on the much shorter list of people you let look back." Marisol looked at the page a long time. At the 11 names. At the man who had carried them for a year because they were hers. And this time it was Marisol who came around the desk and closed the distance herself, deliberately, because she had spent her whole life being approached and dismissed, served and overlooked, sent to the end window where the people who didn't matter went, and she had decided the one thing in her life that would be entirely on her own terms was this. She did not need his bag, or his protection, or his name. She had built her own name, and it was on the glass. She just needed the looking. She had spent 34 years starving for it, and here at last was someone who had learned to do it freely, the way she did it for the people no one else would. Outside, the city went on overlooking its quiet people, the heavy women at the end windows, the old men in worn coats, the ones who took up space the world wished they wouldn't, who saw everything precisely because no one ever thought to watch them back. But in one small storefront with a name on the glass, the teller they'd shamed for serving a woman in rags sat across from the man the whole city feared, as equals, on terms that were finally, completely her own. They'd sent her to the window where the people who don't matter go. She'd built a door of her own, and filled the room behind it with every person the world had refused to see. So that's Marisol's story. And here's the part I keep coming back to. Every single person in it made the same mistake. The manager, the bank, the regional men in their good suits, even Matteo Ricci with 30 years of cunning. All of them looked at a heavy woman at the end window and an old woman in a worn coat and saw two people too small to matter, too small to watch. And that was the exact mistake that brought every one of them down, because the thing about the people you decide not to see is that they can see you perfectly. They've had nothing else to do, from down there, but watch. They thought invisibility meant there was nothing there. It meant there was someone there who'd learned to see in the dark. So here's my question for you, the puzzle one first. The whole thing turned on a single detail Marisol caught that the bank's own accountants missed. One account in that machine that didn't match the others. Looking back at how it was done, the cycle, the threshold, the manual override. What do you think tipped her off that Rosa's account was different from the rest? Tell me in the comments. The people who've worked a counter or balanced the books for a family always seem to spot it fastest, and I love reading why. And then the real one. The one I actually want to know. Have you ever been the invisible one? The person at the end window? The one nobody bothered to really look at? Who saw everything anyway? Or have you been the one who looked? Who treated someone the whole world had written off like they were a person, with nothing in it for you? Tell me below. Not the polished version, the real one. Because I think the world is quietly held up by people it refuses to see, and I'd like, just for a little while in these comments, to see them. If Marisol's story reached something in you, if you've ever been the one at the end window, or the one who finally looked, subscribe and stay with me. There's another underestimated woman coming next, and the world is about to find out exactly how much she's been seeing all along. I'll see you in the next one.